Hello, my name is Sarah Moore, and today I'm going to talk to you about why people hate writing. Now, of course, this wouldn't matter very much if writing wasn't such an exciting, creative and learning supportive activity, but because it is, then it might be worth investigating why people don't like doing it. We know, of course, that not everybody hates writing. We also know that even people who hate writing don't hate writing all the time, and many people who hate writing say that at one point in their lives they actually loved it. So what happens to people that they develop this hatred of writing, which we know 85% of students in university express, this animosity towards this important learning supportive activity? Because we know that when you're 5 or 6 or 7, usually you love writing, and the reason you love writing is that it's usually an activity that you see is something that helps you express yourself and tell your stories. Whereas by the time you're 20 or 21, there's all these rules that you have to obey before you put pen to paper, and it can feel very paralysing. And so I guess that's one of the reasons why people do hate writing, because by the time they reach a certain age, their writing is always being subject to evaluation and judgment by other people, and not this joyful, expressive activity that they may have experienced when they were younger. Of course, if you hate writing, this vicious circle starts to emerge. You hate it, so therefore you avoid doing it, and because you avoid doing it, you don't do it very well, or you do it in a rush, and then you get bad feedback about what you've written, and then you continue to hate it, and so the cycle continues. And so today, I think it might be interesting to look at how some of the really good advice about writing can help you to love writing. But I also think what's very interesting is that there's lots of very well-meaning advice out there about writing. And it's advice that can, of course, is very rational. On the face of it, it's quite a useful advice, but it's advice that can create insecurities in people. So sometimes the most well-meaning advice about writing can have the opposite effect, and that's what I'd like to talk a little bit more about today. The kinds of advice that we get about writing that we hear all the time. If you ask professional or prolific writers, what do you need to do in order to be a good writer? One of the most frequent pieces of advice you get is to read a lot. From Stephen King to Anthony Trollope to all the professors across the world in different disciplines and domains, you'll hear that same advice. Read a lot, because by reading brilliant work, you will know how to produce brilliant work yourself. Now, of course it's important to read, and of course it's important, whatever it is that you're studying or writing about, to understand how the best thinkers and writers in the field are articulating themselves. But there's a big problem within that piece of advice, is that if you read the final draft of someone else's work, you start comparing that perfected work with your first draft. If you try to make your first draft just like the final drafts of other people, you're always going to fail. And so sometimes reading can intimidate us. Reading the perfected work of other people can make us feel even more inadequate than we did before we started reading. It's not that I'm discouraging people from reading and becoming informed within their field or within the area of writing that they're interested in. What I am saying is that if we compare our first drafts to other people's last drafts, then we will always have that sense of inadequacy. You need to give yourself permission to write badly before you can write well. And once people start to understand this, then I think they become more confident, more fluent writers. Remember that the final piece of writing that you read in a book or in a chapter or in a journal is probably the result of 10 different drafts and sometimes many more. So the drafting process is very important. Reading other people's final work may not be the most encouraging place to start in every occasion, in every instance. And also that permission to write badly is very important. I often say to my students, I want you all to write one page on this topic, but I want it to be appalling. Make it as bad as you possibly can make it. And once you give students permission to be bad, and then you get them to read through what they've written, They can never find something that's 100% bad. They'll always find gems of interesting ideas from which they can then build. So give yourself permission to be bad. Give yourself permission to write badly, because it's in the gems and in the stumbling efforts to express your ideas that you will find a way forward. Another piece of advice that people often get about writing is to plan ahead, to make sure you have a plan for your writing, to have headings and subheadings so that you can structure your writing in a way that makes sense, that is rational and that is logical. And yes, of course, that's very good advice, because to have a structure is like having a map. We know where we're going to go and we have a destination in mind. However, there is also a problem in that piece of advice, because by planning too much, we often shut out the possibility for those serendipitous moments of discovery that happen when you're just writing in an unplanned, fluent, perhaps even dreamy kind of a way. So planning has its place, and planning is good when you're writing, but it's not always the place where some of the most magical insights that you can come up with will happen. So planning, yes, good advice, but sometimes it's the unplanned moment that can give rise to the most interesting insight. A third piece of advice that often you get from writing mentors is you must know grammar, and you must know the rules, and you must know how syntax works, and you must know how to spell properly. And yes, of course, that's true. But remember, you don't have to keep all the rules in mind at the same time. Worrying about whether you've spelt a word right or not is a little bit like worrying about what colour your curtains should be before you've laid the foundations of your house. Get your ideas straight, get your story straight, get the notions and concepts that you're going to talk about clear in your mind, and then worry about those details of precision and elegance and expression. A fourth piece of advice about writing, and you hear this again from writers, experienced writers all over the world, is that you have to work very hard in order to produce a good piece of writing. Now, far be it from me to say that you shouldn't work hard in your writing, because it is very hard work. It's cognitively complex, it's emotionally sometimes difficult, it takes hard work to plan and to do and to deliver really beautiful writing, no matter what it is that you're writing about. But again, it's often in the moments of relaxation, when you get up from your desk and you walk away and you sit by the river, or you think for a moment, that you can really get those inspired Eureka, aha moments. So if you find yourself struggling with writing, sometimes working harder and gritting your teeth and staying with the task, the difficult task, is not the thing to do. Sometimes walking away from it, giving yourself a bit of oxygen, letting yourself think and dream and reflect on what it is that you're struggling with, can give rise to insights that might never happen if you kept sweating over the desk and over the writing task. And finally, a piece of advice that you get from a lot of people about writing is that you should get lots of feedback on your writing. The more feedback you get from as many people as you can, the more information you get about how people react to your writing. And yes, feedback is useful, of course. So again, that's another piece of well-meaning advice that can serve us well. But sometimes you have to close the door on the world. Sometimes, in order to really experience the depth of your own ideas and convictions, you must stop listening to everybody else. As Ralph Norman once said, sometimes we like to hide precious information in our jackets, or whisper it to the beloved, or bury it for a while in the vegetable garden. And I think it's really important for very embryonic, very fragile ideas not necessarily to be exposed to the world for feedback until you really have a sense that they are robust and that you're ready to show them to other people. And this is very important, particularly in a world where it's so easy to toss out an idea and get thousands of different perspectives on it, where information is so open, and where through our social networking facilities we can get the perspectives and attitudes of other people. In that world, sometimes it's hard to know what our own ideas contain. And so closing the door on the world, listening to our own voice, having the courage to declare our position is an important skill. It's an important orientation for writers. And when you do that, you will find your voice in a way that may not be possible if you're constantly influenced by the rest of the world. That's not to say that the attitudes and information and knowledge and wisdom in the world can't influence us, but sometimes by not listening to our own voice, we can be dominated by other people's perspectives rather than driven by our own. Writing is such an important, creative, learning supportive activity, and by wrestling with the rules of writing and by sometimes disobeying the rules, we can become more confident, more fluent writers, which is the essence of brilliant learning. There's a brilliant writing mentor called Brenda Hewland, and one of her mantras is that everybody is talented and original and everybody has something important to say. And by developing a love of writing, by sometimes breaking the rules that everyone associates with good writing, you can develop the courage to declare your position and the clarity to think through your ideas. So if you want to find out more about how we approach writing at the University of Limerick, please contact us at ul.ie.